Good morning. I would tell you the date, but I don't even know if I remember what the date is. But I believe it's the 24th of May. Probably 2 more times that we will do this. Then the 3rd week, the first Sunday of June, then we will be meeting. And 3 different services, as I'm sure has been explained to everyone. And at that point, we will not be doing taping, since we will be meeting together again. So today and next Sunday will be the last 2, Lord willing. We're in Acts chapter 13. Acts chapter 13. We have now begun the missionary works. We're in verses 4 through 12 of Acts chapter 13. And looking at this, if you have noticed, Barnabas has been mentioned first in these situations here. It's Barnabas and Saul. And then eventually it gets to Barnabas and Paul. But what you will notice before very long is that it becomes Paul and Barnabas. Then Paul becomes the significant one and is listed first. But we can talk a little bit more about that later on. The first city that the missionaries visited was Salamis, which had a Jewish population that had enough people to support more than one synagogue. And according to the rules of that time, it took at least a minimum of 10 dedicated Hebrew men to constitute a synagogue. So they had at least 20 men able to constitute more than one, at least 2 synagogues in this particular city. And here we also learn that John Mark had accompanied Barnabas and Saul and was serving as their attendant, that is, as their helper, who willingly submits, a person who willingly submits to those over him. To run errands, to do whatever may be needed. And Mark, we find out in Colossians chapter 4 and verse 10, was a cousin of Barnabas. It was his cousin. And later was the cause, John Mark that is, was the cause of a dispute between Paul and Barnabas. And we'll see that when we get to chapter 15. But what Mark's specific duties were, we're not exactly told. Everything that he did in this work that he was involved in. But the mission team eventually made their way westward then from Salamis, some 90 miles, across the island to Paphos on the southwest coast of the island, commonly known as New Paphos, to distinguish it from an older settlement some 7 miles away. Paphos was the seat of the Roman government on the island, and it was noted for its worship of a goddess called the Pantheon, and who was identified with the Greek goddess Aphrodite. And here the brethren encountered a false prophet who also was a sorcerer. Now his Jewish name that he was known by was Bar-Jesus, or son of Jesus. But he also was called Elymas, an Arabic term that meant wise. Now, by calling him Bar Jesus, he wasn't trying to say that he was the son of Jesus Christ. Jesus was a common name, like Joshua. Joshua and Jesus are basically the same name, just a little different between the Hebrew and the Greek. But Bar Jesus was an associate, apparently, of the proconsul, Sergius Paulus, who is described as a man of understanding. Apparently he was educated, though he was the ruler. He had fallen under the influence of this huckster, this deceiver, Elymas. And at one time, critics charged Luke with an error in designating Sergius Paulus as a proconsul. However, archaeological data have demonstrated that the New Testament is quite precise in its record of this situation. And both the ruler's name and his position have been confirmed by discovery in archaeological work. Isn't it amazing how that always happens? People say, oh, the Bible's wrong in that. And then a few years later, some archaeology work is done, and guess what? The Bible is proven right yet again. Sergius Paulus was quite anxious to hear the word of God. And so he summoned Barnabas and Saul into his presence. And when Elymas saw this, he was fearful that he was maybe about to lose his best customer, you might say. And so he withstood them, attempting to divert the ruler's attention away from the faith. That is, from the gospel message. He didn't want Sergius Paulus to hear the gospel message. He wanted to distract him from that. And the verb denotes a face-to-face confrontation that he had with Barnabas and Saul. And the imperfect tense suggests that there may have been several of these encounters where he stood face-to-face against them and trying to present the gospel to Sergius Paulus. Well, verse 9 is significant. And here Saul, and from this point on he is known as Paul. This is the last time that he is called Saul, is verse 9. And obviously it comes to the forefront. He comes to the forefront as the leader of the missionary team. Augustine contended that the apostle adopted the name Paul, which some people suggest means little, to reflect the idea that he was the least of the saints. But others derived this new name, this new designation, from a Hebrew root meaning chosen. Paul meaning chosen. And it is to the credit of Barnabas that there is no evidence of any protest on Barnabas's part that Paul is now moving to the forefront. There doesn't seem to be any jealousy or anything else involved in this, and that speaks well of Barnabas. But the courageous apostle, reinforced with the power of the Spirit, looked straight at Elymas and charged his enemy with being full of all guile. You're full of deceitfulness and all villainy, probably meaning dishonesty. You are full of deceitfulness and dishonesty. Now, some people might say, well, you know, that's sure not a way to start off with a fella, to try to, you know, win his soul and convince him about the gospel, to call him deceitful and dishonest. But Paul was just calling it like it is. He was calling it like it is. And Elymas is further also branded as a son of the devil. A son of the devil. Meaning that he partook of the character of Satan. And he is also the enemy of all righteousness. Paul just keeps on going. And Robertson calls attention to the triple use of all here and designates this as, he calls it, total depravity, being a Calvinist. But perhaps not, we certainly know it's not inherited depravity, as the Calvinists teach. Bar Jesus stood for everything that is wrong and for nothing that is right. And those who think there is something good to be said for everyone, maybe take note of Bar Jesus. Paul didn't seem to have anything good to say about him. But he was all, 3 times, all. Deceitful, dishonest, son of the devil, an enemy of all righteousness. Just on and on. Paul wonders, will you never cease perverting the Lord's right ways? Will you never stop, Bar Jesus? And then the apostle, with a divine insight of coming judgment, says, look, the hand, that is the power of the Lord, is about to be. That means that it's certain, the certainty of being expressed with a present tense upon you. The power of the Lord is about to come upon you. And you will be blind. You will be unable to see even the light of the sun for a while. And immediately it says, soon as Paul said that, immediately something like a mist shrouded the sorcerer's vision, and the teacher who had led so many into darkness was himself now wandering around trying to find someone to lead him by the hand. I wonder how many were willing to take that job. One wonders whether Elymas, once the judgment was removed, ever saw the light, if he ever came to see the light. We can hope, but we're not really told. And this was a punitive miracle, a punishment, but it had the same effect as a benevolent sign. Here is an interesting question. If modern day miracle workers can truly perform benevolent signs, why can't they also produce miracles of judgment upon their foes? Those who say, you're a fake. Those who say, you can't really do that. Why can't they strike them blind? Like Paul was able to do if they really have power. If they're really working for God, why don't they have that power to do that? Paul did. The wonder produced faith in the heart of Sergius Paulus. The ruler believed. When he saw all of this, and he saw Bar Jesus struck blind, he believed. He believed. And he kept on being astonished at the marvelous teaching of the Lord. Now, the word believed, again, is interesting, and it summarizes full obedience to the plan of salvation. In other words, there seems to be no doubt that Sergius Paulus became a Christian. He obeyed the gospel. Notice that the proconsul's astonishment was in the Savior's teaching, not merely in the miracle that was done, but in his teaching. And that's where it needs to be. His attention moved from the means to the end, which was the gospel. Now, I believe that Sir William Ramsay was wrong when he argued that it was not necessary to assume that Sergius Paulus was baptized. He says that on page 166 and following in his commentary. But unless there is some contextual evidence which indicates that the term believed was used in an unusual sense, in some other kind of sense, it must be concluded that the word is used in a way similar to other references in this book, references like Acts 4:32, Acts 5:14, Acts 16:34. In all of those cases, believed meant that they became Christians. So why would it not be the same here? And why would he say that? Well, because he doesn't believe in baptism. So he wants to try to get rid of it. Incidentally, in 1912, Ramsay discovered a monument in Antioch, which contains the name of a lady named Sergia Paulia. That's interesting, isn't it? Sergius Paulus. And then they find this inscription, or this monument rather, with a Sergia Paulia. Kind of sounds like a female version of Sergius Paulus, doesn't it? And it is believed that this person was the daughter of the proconsul of Cyprus. And further, he argued, based upon certain evidential inferences, that she was a Christian. And this may suggest that the Christian influence of Sergius Paulus lived on in some of his offspring. Isn't that interesting? That not only Sergius Paulus became a Christian, but then his daughter also was a Christian as well. I find that very interesting. Very interesting indeed. It shows the influence that we can have. It would always be very much interesting to kind of look back, not that it's anything that records need to really be kept on, but to know who it was that taught us. And then maybe think about the fact, well, who taught that person? And obviously somebody before that person taught them, and somebody before them taught them. And on, back it goes. All the way back to the apostles on the day of Pentecost and going forward. They became a Christian, they taught somebody else, they became a Christian, they taught somebody, they became a Christian. Somewhere along the way, maybe some just read the Bible and understood and followed it, and then they began to teach it and taught someone, and then they taught someone, and eventually it comes to us. What a great thing it would be to be a part of that, to say that we taught somebody, that we encouraged somebody to become a Christian, that we were an influence in their life in some way to cause them to be a Christian and keep that line continuing on. Just as Sergius Paulus did with his daughter, and then who knows how far it went from there. But interesting. Interesting what archaeology has given us and shown to us, when at one time people said Luke didn't even know what he was talking about. But here it is, he was a Christian, his daughter was a Christian, and on it goes. Next time, Lord willing, we will look at verses 13 through 41 and then begin to take a look at what those verses have to tell us.